Well, I like making food that tastes good, and I don't even mind making food that tastes bad. But if I had to choose, I think I'd pick the former. So if you want to know how to make it a little bit better, but maybe not quite as good as it maybe could be, I think that you should listen to what I'm talking about. And if you learn a little something from this, well, I hope it served a purpose, and hey, that's what we're here for. Good, better. Nailed it. Woo!
Hello, and welcome to the Cook Better podcast. My name is Corey, and I'm the host of the podcast here. And I think today is going to be another one of those little bit different days. Maybe now we've had enough different episodes that maybe every episode is just a little bit different. But I think this one, we're talking about a bechamel or a white sauce. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because a bechamel is something that you can use for so many different things, and it has so many different applications that I think it's something that if you've never made it before, and it's so simple that it's something that's good to have in your, in your back pocket for if you're making food or you're doing you're just looking for something to elevate your normal meal, and this is a great thing to have to do that. A perfect example would be, you have a meat and you have a starch or whatever. You got some meat, you got some potatoes or some rice, and you've got a vegetable, but you need something to add some flavor. And so a bechamel or any type of a sauce is going to be a good, a good addition to the meal. And a lot of times, I forget if I was watching, there's so many different cooking shows that I don't even know which cooking show I was watching, but a good sauce can cover up a lot of imperfections. And if you got heavy, or if you've got something like your chicken might be a little bit dry, but hey, if you've got a good sauce over top of it, that it's not as noticeable, or it hides it, right? Ideally we cook everything perfect, and we don't need things like that, but that's just. The reality is that doesn't happen every time. And even if you do cook a piece of chicken breast or something perfect and you want to add, adding a sauce just intensifies the flavors and adds something extra there. Because, a lot of times I'll marinate a chicken or put some kind of rub on it or whatever, with whatever flavors I might be going for. And the chicken absorbs some of that flavor, but it's not like it's something that's going to be, the chicken's not, I guess, you know what I'm saying? There's a little bit of that added flavor, but it's not super intense. So by adding a sauce, now we've got, just that much more flavor, and all that just gets intensified. So I think that if we were to do, I just like it. I like to add a sauce. I love gravy. Gravy's good. But growing up gravy's kind of a very basic flavor. You get your chicken, or your beef or whatever, and that's it. Typically gravy doesn't have, you're not getting added flavor from herbs and a few other things. So doing another type of a sauce is kind of how we remedy that. And bechamel is just the sauce that I would say that for me is something that I use most of all. Now, but it's called a bechamel, But a bechamel is just a white sauce. A lot of people just think of it as some kind of a white sauce, and it's one of the 5 mother sauces. And if you've kind of been around cooking for a little while or watched any of the cooking shows or anything like that, you've probably heard the mother sauces brought up. And excuse me, I gotta take a sip of coffee here. But a bechamel is one of the 5 mother sauces, and all it is to make a bechamel, the reason it's so simple is because it's really only technically 3 ingredients, and then you can build from there. And that's why it's called a mother sauce. You start with these 3 basic ingredients, and then depending on what you add after that, after these 3 things, can take you in whatever direction. And then you get to the other kind of sauces, daughter sauces they call them, that are kind of the next step down, like in a pyramid almost. So, but the other kind of, hollandaise is another sauce. Tomato-based tomato sauce is another of the 5. Velouté is another one, and that's very similar to a bechamel, but you would have a, it's more of got kind of a, you would use stock instead of stock in a roux, like a light stock with a roux instead of milk, which I guess I didn't even start off by saying what a bechamel, what ingredients are in a bechamel. And really 3 things. You've got your butter, you've got flour, and then you have milk. And I'll use heavy cream sometimes in place of milk, depending on what I'm making. The heavy cream has a little bit more of a sweetness to it that, depending on the dish, you may or may not want. But they're very similar in flavor. So your milk and your cream are pretty interchangeable. And, the cream just adds an extra thickness, or, it has a certain texture quality to it, too, that changes things. So, but I guess to start out, I guess I'll just get right into it because, and talk about what I use a bechamel for. And but to do that, we need to know how to make it, right? So these are items, and like I said, I like to use it because these are things that I always have in the house. I've always got flour, I always have butter, and then I've always got milk. So I've always got a sauce sitting in my house ready to be assembled when you start making a bechamel. And it just, like I said, it elevates things. And so you start out to make a bechamel, you've got butter and you've got flour, and you make a roux. And like I talked about before, there's all these words seem fancy, maybe to me as for some reason, but somebody says, "Oh, you got to make a roux," and I don't know how to make a roux. And it's, well, you just mix butter and flour together. That's all it is. It's just, and then same with a bechamel. I'm making a bechamel. Oh, that sounds fancy. Yeah, sure. It's butter, flour, and milk mixed together. It just sounds fancy. These words are just describing multiple ingredients or a technique. So it's not that they are fancy. It's just once you know what they are, then that is pretty simple. But it just sounds like something that might be more complicated. But anyway, you make your roux. So you have you heat up some butter, a couple. That depends on what you want to do. Now there is, if you were to look up like certain recipes for a roux, there are certain ratios that you might want to use, and it all depends kind of on what you want to do or what you. But typically I think it's a 1-to-2 ratio with butter and flour. If you're using 2 tablespoons of butter, you would use 4 tablespoons of flour. You can do 1-to-1 and it will come out. It might take a little longer to thicken up, but it'll be okay. And then, but you start by melting your butter, and then you add, once the butter is melted, you add your flour to it. And then that kind of creates a little bit of a paste. And then you're going to want to just mix that around. You don't want it to burn, so you take a whisk, is what I like to use, a small whisk, because it really makes moving everything around simple or easy. And then you're just going to move that around, and you're going to start to smell, flour has a kind of a nutty smell to it as it starts to cook and starts to heat up. And you want to cook that flour through. And so, depending on what you're making, if you're doing some gumbo or something like that, you've heard of like a dark roux or a brown roux, and then you're going to let it go for a long time, and you're going to really want to start getting some color on that roux, and you'll notice it starts to turn brown. And this is where you've got to pay attention, because as you're making this roux, if you walk away, this isn't something that you can walk away from. But the good news is, for making a bechamel, it really doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. What am I talking about? Time. It goes quick, but it's only like a couple minutes, and this is where I really like having a gas stove personally, because I could, the flame, you can adjust the flame, and then there are times when it starts to bubble, that roux starts to bubble, and I know, I got to pull. I take the pan right off of the flame completely as I'm whisking, but you're just incorporating, or you're kind of blending the butter and the flour together, and you want to get that flour cooked through. And like I said, that only takes a minute or so, and you don't want it to go for very long, because you don't want it to get too dark brown. This bechamel, a lot of people call it a white sauce, you want to retain that blonde color. You don't want to have a dark brown roux and then add the cream to it, or you're going to end up with some tan sauce of some kind. And the flavor does change too a little bit as that butter and that flour cook longer and it gets more brown. That it does slightly change the flavor. And maybe it's something to mess around with. Now, is it ruined? Are you going to throw it away? If I'm cooking it at home and it went too long and my sauce is a little bit tan instead of white, pure white, no, I'm not going to throw it away. It's still going to taste good. But the idea is just to get the flour cooked through with a bechamel, just to get it cooked through, and then you're going to add your milk. Now, I'd honestly, in all honesty, I don't bother measuring my milk. Or my cream, I'll put maybe, a cup or so in. One thing I've noticed with sauces is that I tend to think I need a lot more sauce than I really do. And so I'm going to need like 3 cups of milk and everything for this sauce, and then you start spooning it out over your chicken or something, and realize each person only uses like 3 tablespoons, and the 3 cups was a bit excessive. So don't feel like you gotta. That's a trap I always fall into. I gotta have all this sauce, and usually that's just not the case. You can get by with just a little bit, and a little bit can go a long way. Again, we want to complement whatever we're adding the sauce to. We don't want to overwhelm the dish by making it. Now we're talking. A lot of times my plate will end up looking like more of a soup with chunks of chicken in it than a piece of chicken with some sauce on top. So you got to be careful there. But anyway, you kind of add your milk to it or your cream, and then you whisk that into, and then we want to bring that to a simmer. And that flour and butter combination is a thickener, or it acts as a thickener. Or it is a thickener, whatever. I guess those two things are both mean the same thing. And it will, your sauce will start to thicken. Now, maybe this doesn't seem obvious, and it wasn't something immediately obvious to me, but the amount of flour that you have in the beginning you want to get your ratios somewhat correct, because that's what's going to determine how thick of a sauce you end up with. If you do, 1 tablespoon of butter and 2 tablespoons of flour, and then you put 6 cups of milk in, that's not going to thicken. It will thicken very minimally, but it's not going to get the consistency that you probably are shooting for. So, you might have to adjust your quantities to get the right consistency, and that's very similar. Now, the good thing is you could add some more milk. If you start out with just a little bit and you're going, man, this stuff is turning into some sort of Elmer's glue paste here. I've got way too much flour and my sauce is way thicker than it needs to be or than I want it. You can add a little bit more milk, and you want to be stirring constantly if you do that, so that just to make sure everything gets incorporated. Now, I will add. I think traditionally, if you watch any French cooking or you do or really any cooking instructional videos on making a bechamel, you'll see that a lot of people add nutmeg to it. And I do that as well. And nutmeg is one of those spices where a little bit goes a long way. And it's more of I think of nutmeg more as it's a nutty flavor, but it's sweeter in my mind. But it just gives a flavor that's unexpected, I guess, to the average person, or maybe just to somebody from Michigan. For me, maybe it's just unexpected. There's another one of those things where it's a hint of flavor that is hard to place if you're not familiar with it, but just that little added flavor of nutmeg just does something that tastes good, and it complements. Nutmeg can complement anything that you do with it. I've made a cheese sauce, and I started with a base of a bechamel, and it still turned out really good. And just that added little thing in there that anybody can. It's very simple. It doesn't take much. A little bit goes a long way with nutmeg. You don't want to have a nutmeg forward sauce, but you want that just in the background as just kind of harmonizing with the rest of the ingredients that you're going to put in. Now, that's your basic bechamel. That's your basic white sauce. I will say, too, that an Alfredo sauce is not made the same as a bechamel. I think I've made the mistake before I actually looked into it of thinking that, all right, I got my white sauce and that's Alfredo sauce. Bechamel and Alfredo are the same. They're not the same. They look similar because we've got two different white sauces, but the main difference is that an Alfredo does not have any flour in it. Bechamel does. You've got your butter, flour, and milk to make a bechamel. Alfredo sauce is just butter and then you have Parmesan cheese, and that's kind of there's no flour. You do have heavy cream in an Alfredo sauce. That's where you get the creamy flavor from, but there is no flour in there. The thickening agent, so to speak, would be the Parmesan. Now, I've talked many times, I think every other episode at least, I end up mentioning that I believe you should shred your cheese from the block, not buying bags of pre-shredded cheese, because of the stuff that they use to keep it from sticking together in the package. Now, that's the case for, all the different cheeses that you can buy from a grocery store. It's also the case for Parmesan. And a lot of us grew up, and for one reason or another, you didn't have much of the real Parmesan cheese. The stuff in the can, the green can, the grated Parmesan that can go on a shelf in the pantry, has the same thing in it that the shredded cheese does. There's an anti-caking agent in there that keeps it from sticking together. The reason this matters, other than I don't know that if it's negative health reasons you shouldn't eat that, but what it does is prevents the sauce from blending the way it should. So if you're making an Alfredo sauce or any type of a cheese sauce, which a bechamel can be the base of, we'll get to that in a little bit, you can't use cheese that comes out of a bag, or you will have a grainy and gritty sauce. So if you're making an Alfredo sauce, you're going to melt the butter, and then you're going to add your heavy cream, and then you're going to take your shredded, grated Parmesan that you grated by hand, by hand, and you're going to do that. Now, I did watch a video of a chef, and I can't think of his name, but I know it was on the Epicurious YouTube channel, and he makes an Alfredo sauce by using straight up Parmesan and butter, and that's it. No cream, and it looked really good. I've never tried that, but that's just, I guess this is an episode about a bechamel, but an Alfredo sauce is very similar. It looks similar. You've got cream typically, you've got butter, but then you've got the cheese. There is a different flavor profile. Now, you can take a bechamel, and I have before too. That's what I began to say, is I've taken a bechamel base, and then I just added Parmesan cheese after it had started to thicken. I would add Parmesan cheese to it, and then you get a similar flavor, but that flour in there, you end up with a thicker sauce that's more pasty a little bit, so in a bechamel. So it just was like it was a Parmesan cheese sauce, but it wasn't an Alfredo sauce. I'll say that. And it wasn't that it tasted bad. It's just that once you do, it didn't taste quite right, and then once I realized, that's not how you would make an Alfredo sauce, then okay, it tastes better getting not having that flour in there, and you do need to use a fair amount of Parmesan for an Alfredo sauce, because that's what's thickening. And the heavy cream, is is a little bit thicker anyway, but that cheese is really what's going to be thickening. That Parmesan is what's thickening the sauce, kind of. So you need a fair amount in order to make the Alfredo sauce that way. But that being said, a bechamel is the base of many cheese sauces. Excuse me. And if you're making homemade macaroni and cheese, which I'll do every once in a while, then you're definitely going to want to do a bechamel as your base. And you start with the making that basic bechamel just the way you did it. Now, I will do a lot of times, that's your basic sauce, what we talked about: flour, milk, butter. I've said it 20 times now. I'm sorry if it's getting annoying. And I'd like to count how many times I've said bechamel so far. That's probably getting a little bit annoying too, but that's what we're talking about. So that's what I'm going to keep saying. But you can, we've got the basic deal there, and then you can take and before you even do that, sometimes what I'll do, because we start with a butter, like I said, right? You start with a butter, then we're adding the flour to make a roux. Now you can take and instead of doing the, going that route, you could saute some onion and some garlic maybe in the butter prior to adding the flour. And that's obviously going to infuse that butter, that fat, with a little bit of flavor from the onion and the garlic. Now, the idea behind a sauce is that in theory you want something that's going to be smooth and possibly velvety, or you're not looking for chunks of things in the sauce, even with a cheese sauce or any type of thing, unless you don't want chunks in there. So in onion and garlic, this is the same way. Now you can achieve this by if you're doing that onion and garlic in the butter, and then you mix in the flour and make everything, and you're cooking. You can always take like an immersion blender and stick that in there and make sure everything is blended really good. People have gone as far as depending on what you're doing, you could take run something through a cheesecloth. Now, I've done that before. It's a cheesecloth through a strainer just to get any chunks out, so you have no chunks. Odds are that the people that are sitting at the dinner table with you are not going to mind a couple little things, or if nothing's perfect. And I know that's always the case with me, but you still want to try to do stuff. I want to try personally. Like if I'm doing it, I might as well do it, do it correctly. In theory, I'm out here cooking food and spending all this time to make this sauce, and it's like, well, if you could have just done one little thing, it would have been perfect. And but you decided you didn't want to, so it didn't matter. So, but you can do that with that infuses some flavor. to that basic sauce. Or you can make a bundle of herbs if you want to add some, if you're putting it over chicken, think of flavors that would go with the chicken breast or whatever. Rosemary is pretty typical with that. And so you've got your onion and garlic flavor going together. Now, the other way to achieve that would be maybe if you've got time you want your sauce your bechamel to simmer a little bit. Maybe you have some roasted garlic or something, and you just throw a whole clove of garlic in and just kind of let it sit in the sauce. I've done it before by wrapping up some herbs, like I said, you could do rosemary and some thyme. Maybe some parsley or something, or a bay leaf, and wrap it. There is a term for that whole thing, and I can't think of it off the top of my head now. But there's another one of those things where it's a fancy word, but it's just you just tie up herbs, and that's what that word means. A simple process with a descriptive word that's there, and that'll add flavor. A little salt, maybe it needs a little salt, a little pepper. Again, if you're doing a true bechamel and you're working in a restaurant or something, you want to make sure to use white pepper, not black pepper, because we're making a white sauce and we don't want little black specks in there. So there's all these things that, and again, you don't want to burn your onions or garlic and add a ton of browning to it if you're making a white bechamel. That would, it's not going to be perfect. It doesn't need to be. No, for 99% of us, it doesn't need to be. I'm guessing if you actually work in a kitchen, you're not taking all your instruction from me anyway. But that's, if we're doing the process and going through with it, that would be. Now, I don't have white pepper, in all honesty. My pantry does not include white pepper because I've heard that there's a little bit different of a flavor profile from white pepper to black pepper. I don't know that I would ever be able to tell the difference unless I had them almost plain on top of something. Maybe I could tell the difference. But really for me, it just hasn't been one of those things that I felt it necessary to purchase. Now, that might be something, like I've said before, that works great as a gift. I don't need people buying me anything necessarily, but if I always tell my family or whoever, if you're going to buy me something on a birthday or on a holiday, get me some seasonings and some seasonings or some sauces or some stuff to cook with, because that's something I can use and I can share it with everybody. And it's hard to justify sometimes going out and buying white pepper just so that my sauce doesn't have black flecks in it. I'm not a professional chef here. My family will be just fine if there's a few black flecks in my bechamel. But so anyway, yeah, that's just another one way to add flavor to a basic sauce, and you can do that obviously depending on what you're cooking. I like to complement whatever marinade, like I started to say before, I'd like to complement whatever marinade I'm using for the meat that I'm making. We want to have it just it's adding to or accentuating these flavors that are already there in the different elements of the dish. Now, I don't want the entire plate to have the same flavor profile. If I've got rosemary in my chicken, the sauce is kind of there to complement the chicken. So I'm going to have some rosemary in the bechamel, but I'm not going to be throwing rosemary in with the Brussels sprouts or rosemary in with the rice or whatever. I don't want the whole plate to taste like one giant pile of whatever herb that I'm using. But I do want those two things. The sauce is going with the chicken. I do want that to complement it, or pork or whatever. So one of the other things I've done, other than adding, herbs to it, you can, like I said, it's a base for so many different things. I've used it as, if I'm doing pork chops, something with pork, it does work well with chicken too, but with pork, I like to do like a Dijon mustard sauce. And it's one of those things that has really good flavor, and adding it to a bechamel or using a bechamel as the base really mellows out a Dijon mustard, and it makes it sweeter. It's almost because of the cream and the nutmeg and what have you. But I'd start out with that basic sauce, and then really all I'm going to do is add some whatever I feel like of Dijon mustard to it, and that might not be the correct way to make a mustard sauce, but that's the way I'll do it. And just adding that Dijon has a tanginess and it just goes really well with pork, I think, and that's what I'll tend to use it for. It's just a weird thing if you've never had it, and I get it. It might sound kind of gross. It did to me at first. Why does everybody on all these cooking shows keep making these Dijon sauces? Mustard is can be an overwhelming flavor, but by putting it in with that cream, you get kind of the flavor profiles of the mustard without it being as intense as it would be, obviously, if you just squirted Dijon mustard on it. I think people look at you like you're a crazy person if you cut up your pork chops and dip them in Dijon mustard, but if you you mix a little Dijon in a sauce, then you're okay. And that mustard does kind of mellow out as it gets heated. And if you've ever cooked using mustard, I recently got a smoker or whatever, and so you use mustard as a binder. Now, typically I just use basic yellow mustard for a binder for smoking food or to make the rub stick or whatever. But when you do that, you don't taste the mustard at all. And I don't know how that's even physically possible. But the mustard isn't. You don't get any of that mustard flavor in there. So when you use it as if it cooks long enough, something must be with the heat that mustard just mellows out and as it cooks and just kind of disappears. So similarly, once you add it to a sauce like that, it really mellows out, and but you still get some of the flavor there in a sauce, different than you do when you use it as a binder on a meat or when you're smoking something. But it's really good. I would suggest to try it because it's just something that tastes really good. And if you go to some restaurants, they'll have it, and then it's it's worth trying. It's worth trying. And the other thing I'll do is make a mushroom sauce. Now, I will make a mushroom sauce with the base of being a bechamel. That might not technically be the correct way to do it. If I was at a restaurant, they might say, "Why are you using a bechamel as a base for a mushroom sauce?" But I think I just love the flavor of mushrooms, and you can do it, and it really gets. Now, typically your mushroom sauce, if you think of a mushroom sauce with a steak, you picture a brown. You would picture maybe a brown sauce that would go with it. So that'd be a velouté or whatever, or Espanol. I don't know if I say all these words correctly, but that Espanol is like another one of the 5 mother sauces, and you use a brown stock and a roux. So you make your roux, and then you use like a beef stock or a dark stock, and a lot of times that'll have maybe a little bit of tomato puree getting cooked, and then on top of that you would have like your mirepoix. So you might have some celery, carrots, and onion. That's your mirepoix, and which is another fancy word. All these French words. Maybe there's people in France that none of this sounds fancy, but as somebody who doesn't speak French, mirepoix, a roux, and a bechamel, and a espagnole or whatever. All these things sound fancy because they're French, but a mirepoix is carrot, celery, and onion, and then you kind of brown those and cook those down, and then you add your flour, and that makes like a thick roux paste, and then you got tomato puree in there, and just a little bit, because this is not a tomato sauce. And then you add your brown stock, and now you're getting a thicker thing. And that's another thing where you'd blend it to make everything real smooth and velvety, and then but then that's more the typical mushroom sauce. Like I said, I'll do a bechamel and add mushroom to it and have it. And a lot of times if I do that, that'll be something where I'll make that bechamel, and it won't be something I'll spoon over after. It'd be more of a because I'll make a bechamel, and I'll have my cast iron pan or whatever I'm cooking the chicken in, and then right at the end I'll dump that that bechamel in there with the mushrooms and everything, and almost make it so that the chicken kind of is simmering in this sauce. And that just adds a little bit of the chicken flavor to it. Now, that's changing everything, and it's probably not technically correct, but it to be doing it that way. But it adds that chicken flavor to the sauce, because obviously we know we've got some chicken fat that's rendered out and everything that's going to go into it. Fat's not going to blend in with the sauce perfect, but the flavor tastes really good. It's not, like you said, it's not all... technique-wise, maybe exactly what you should be doing, but it tastes really good. And people aren't paying me to cook for them, so I can do whatever I want. And flavor overrides everything else. Presentation is important. Technique is important. But at the end of the day, if the flavor is what I want, then perfect. That's what I'm looking for. Now, what else are we doing? Similar to doing that, like I said, to do the mushrooms and cook it in the pan with the chicken, or dump the bechamel so that the chicken is kind of in there. I've seen a lot of recipes where people will do that with I don't know if they call it like a Tuscan chicken, and I don't know how accurate it actually is to being a Tuscan chicken. Maybe it's right on the money, maybe it's not, but I'll see people use the bechamel and then you'll add maybe some sun-dried tomatoes in there. You picture you've browned your chicken breast, and then now you've got you got some nice golden brown crust on your chicken breast. It's looking pretty. You've got some herbs in there, and you're doing that, and then you pour this bechamel in around the chicken. So now it's kind of simmering in the sauce, and then you take some sun-dried tomatoes and throw that kind of in there, and maybe some spinach to kind of maybe you've wilted it down or cooked the spinach a little before, but you're throwing that in there. So you've got your red, your green, your white sauce for the most part. You got your chicken breast, and then you could maybe do some capers or something you could put in there too. So it's just really endless, virtually endless as to how you want to, mix all these things together and put them together. And that tastes really good. And obviously you get all these, the more things you add to it, the more flavor you get. Sometimes a simple sauce is all you want. You don't want something that's just packed full of flavor necessarily. But if you do that, with the sun-dried tomato and the chicken and spinach and stuff, that really does, it really does taste good, and it's something different. And the only other thing I might do that I can think of right now is to make some sort of a cheese sauce. And we talked kind of about the Alfredo, and I've made incorrect Alfredo, but by just adding Parmesan cheese to a basic bechamel, and you get a similar sauce. But then, of course, if you want to make a macaroni and cheese, and you want to make it from scratch, you do the same thing. You start with from this base of a bechamel, and then you're just adding cheese to it. And again, this is going to thicken up. Cheese is a thickener. It will thicken. So if your bechamel is a little bit more on the loose side, that's what you want if you're going to be adding cheese to it, because it will thicken quite a bit. Now I'll add cheddar cheese and everything, some good cheese, maybe to that. Maybe I'll add some Gouda, some cheddar. If I'm making a macaroni and cheese, I know that the American cheese is, I'm speaking as I don't know what it is more processed and isn't a whole cheese. I will add some of that to it. There's a creaminess that you get from an American cheese that you just don't get from any of the other cheeses. Now, I have done it without American cheese. I do like the flavor that you get from a little bit of it. If you want to, I don't think we're necessarily trying to keep things healthy if we're adding a cheese sauce to anything. I don't know that the American cheese is necessarily the thing that pushes it over the edge because, we're talking cream, butter, and cheese here. Health food is kind of out the window at that point. But I have done it without having American cheese, but there's something about, there's just a flavor profile that's there when you have it that I really like. Now, if we're making a good velvety bechamel, we do get some of that same creaminess and everything from the bechamel mixture. So it's not 100% necessary to have the American cheese there at that point, but it is a good addition. So all you're going to do is make your bechamel and then take, a couple handfuls of whatever kind of cheese. This is a great thing, and what I find myself doing more often than not, when I'm making macaroni and cheese, it's one of those things that I will make when I've got like 4 different chunks of random cheeses that need to be used up in the fridge. None of them are big enough pieces on their own to make anything out of, but if I throw them all together, then I've got something. But you can really, you got to sell it though. You're not just making macaroni and cheese. You're making 4 cheese macaroni with, Ritz crackers crumbled on top, or I don't know. You got to really sell it. You got everything's in the name, right? It makes it sound fancy. I'm cleaning out my refrigerator. Macaroni and cheese just doesn't have the same effect necessarily, but both of them are accurate statements. So I'll do that, but you got a little bit of Parmesan, or I probably don't typically use Parmesan, but like I said, you got a little Gouda. Maybe you even have some provolone, or you've got some cheddar cheese, or you've got some pepper jack, or whatever. Just take it, man, and throw it in that bechamel. Now, some of them have different melting points. You don't want the cheese. You want to mix it in good, and just stir it all around, and then pour it over your pasta, and you've got yourself a really good macaroni and cheese. Now, with a bechamel, as with most things, you want to taste as you go, and taste it before you taste the cheese sauce before you pour it over the macaroni and cheese. I've made this mistake too many times. The color looks like what I'm looking for with a cheddar cheese sauce or whatever. But I just need a little more seasoning, a little bit of salt. The flour, I don't know what it is, but in a bechamel or whatever, in that roux, it's not a salty flavor. I mean, we haven't added any salt. You need to have a seasoning in there to really wake up some of these flavors. So a lot of times I'll taste after putting in the cheese, because cheese has a salty flavor, especially. It is dependent on what kind of cheese you're using, but there is a lot of salt in there. So you don't want to salt too much ahead of time, but definitely taste after. Now we have all that cheese incorporated. We're not going to over salt that way. I've over salted by adding salt to the bechamel to get that to the point where I think it's seasoned properly. And then I add the cheese. Now we've got too much. And you can't come back from that. Once you add it, it's in. You're not taking it out. So if you're making a cheese sauce, that's my best suggestion would be that you season after cheese is incorporated. And we should be tasting throughout too. Same with the pepper. You can add the pepper beforehand, but into the bechamel, but do not add the salt until at the end. I'm trying to think. I just love a bechamel. I really do, and it's like I said, it's just something that I've always got in the house. I've got those items. It's simple. It's quick. It doesn't require a lot of technique. I think you can go as extreme as you want. So, and it's just a good sauce. A good sauce is just, I think, key to especially when you're having a meat. I think it can be good on a vegetable too, depending on what the vegetable is. Now, I've made a bechamel. I don't know. I don't have a recipe in front of me, so I'm trying to think. I've made creamed Brussels sprouts. In the Brussels sprout episode, I didn't talk about them, but I've made them before, and that's almost like I'm trying to remember if I think that ended up basically being a bechamel, and then I had just layered a bunch of cooked Brussels sprouts in a pan, pretty much poured a bechamel over it, if I remember correctly, and then sprinkled some good cheese over top, some good Parmesan over top of that, and then baked that until it kind of got a golden brown crust. Now, a bechamel will get a crust to it all on its own. If you put it in were to do that with the Brussels sprouts and pour that over and put it in under the broiler, it will brown and get a nice, that changes the flavor a little bit too, and then gives you that browning, which is always tastes good for some reason. Anytime anything turns brown like that, it's just got that just a added level of flavor that is really good. But I could be 100% off on that, but I'm pretty sure that's roughly how I made that creamed Brussels sprouts, which sounds disgusting. I know it does. The name doesn't make it sound appetizing, but maybe you have to call it something Brussels sprouts with a bechamel pour over or whatever. It's all. I'm just making stuff up here, but it was really good. But then you start using that bechamel as your base, and then there's just so many different things you can add to it. And if you have a sauce with your chicken, if you're making food for somebody or just yourself, if you have a sauce that gets added on, it's just gonna elevate things and make it taste that much better. And it's a simple thing you can do that's gonna be so much nicer than just the chicken on its own or the pork on its own. Now you have a Dijon mustard sauce, and you can have it on the side. And if somebody wants it, they can have it. If they don't want it, no big deal. Who cares? But it's there, and it's a simple thing to make. So it's just one of those things. Like I said, I've said it too many times now. Probably it's there as an option just to elevate, and it's so simple. And it's used in so many things. If you want to, I don't have everything in front of me, but if you pull it up, there's so many different sauces that come from that bechamel mother sauce, where that's your base, and then you take it from there, and you can take it in so many different directions. Everything's got a name for it. I say, like a mushroom sauce, or I've done certain sauces. We're not reinventing the wheel here. There's techniques and names for all these different things, and they're out there, and there's a reason that so many, other things are derived from this one sauce. There's tons of other sauces, and to me, when I see something like that, the 5 mother sauces, I go, well, maybe that's a good thing to learn, because there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dishes around the world, and probably in just French cuisine there's that many different dishes, and if they only have, out of all those different sauces that you can make, there's only 5 that are like the main ones, and everything's built off that. So I'm going to learn how to make those 5 sauces, because from there you can go anywhere. So anyway, if you've never made a bechamel, try it. It's very simple. It really is not difficult, and I think that it's going to change the way you cook a lot of foods. And anything you do like that, and it's just a technique thing. Once you learn how to make a roux, which isn't difficult, then you can go anywhere from there, and you can make your gravy from scratch rather than buying these packets and just shaking out a packet of fairly flavorless, gravy mix. Make it yourself, Then now we're just making a roux and add the stock and maybe some of the chicken juice if you just want more of a gravy. But anyway, or you can use cornstarch and water, and then the juice from the protein that you're cooking to make a real gravy, not just a flavor enhanced bunch of different powders thrown together. So that's where I'm at with that. Learn to make a sauce. I hope this is helpful. I hope it inspires somebody who's never made a bechamel before to try to make it. You can go so many different directions from it. It's something I use all the time, and it's just a great flavor. And thanks for listening. Email me at thecookbetterpodcast@gmail.com with any comments, any questions, maybe some suggestions. What do you use a bechamel for? I'd love to learn something new, or maybe an additive an addition or a daughter sauce that you've made from a bechamel that you really like to use for a certain thing. I'd love to hear it. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.